And, when you talk about economics, when you talk about financial performance, you like to see that hockey stick growth, right? One things you don't, what one type of graph you don't want to see is hockey stick growth when it comes to anti-Semitism and hate. And unfortunately, that is what we are witnessing. ADL has been studying these statistics for nearly 50 years. We are at a all-time high. You can go to adl.org to learn more about this. But in 2024, we had 9,354 recorded anti-Semitic incidents. That beat 2023 after the terrible events of October 7th in Israel. And things are headed in the wrong direction, both online and offline.
So let's talk about that. And I just got to put a plug in. My mom was director of the American Jewish Committee years ago in Miami. And one of the things from the experience, and I know some of the hate mail she used to get when she was in that role, anti-Semitism never went away. But the last 2 years, it's actually been more than the last 2 years, but it's been unleashed in ways that American Jews just have not witnessed on such a grand scale since October 7th. And yet, ADL and different affiliates of ADL and different organizations are pushing back. And for instance, right now, as we're speaking, there's an effort with Meta, the shareholders meeting with what I would call Facebook, because I'm over 40, but Meta, to deal with hate speech. So explain to us, what is Proposal 8 and when will we find out if it's going to make a difference?
Yeah, so Proposal 8 is a proposal that calls on Meta to issue a public report which details how the company is addressing anti-Semitism, anti-LGBTQ hate, and hate against people with disabilities. It's about giving the shareholders transparency into how the company is protecting its users. So that is on the ballot, was on the ballot today at the annual meeting that Meta hosted. We will know the results within the next 4 business days or so through a SEC filing. But here's why it's important, okay? Meta reaches, get this, Adam, over 3 billion users every day. That's 3 billion users every day. That's more than the entire populations of India and China combined. With $1 trillion plus market cap, and you've been following them for a long time, and over $150 billion in annual ad revenues, Meta has the moral responsibility to ensure that its platforms don't fuel anti-Semitism and hate. But Adam, this is not just a moral issue. We're talking about a business risk. Folks who follow Meta, analysts who follow Meta know that the company earns 97% of its revenue for advertising. Hate speech drives away users, it invites regulatory scrutiny, and it scares off advertisers. So in our opinion, fighting hate isn't just about doing the right thing. It's necessary to protect the long-term shareholder value at Meta, and that is the fight we're fighting.
Let me bring Paul into this discussion, then I'll follow up afterward.
All right, and I know with people out there are forgetting about the core issue, but plenty of people are going to say, who's Meta to decide what is hate speech and what is not? So my question is, where do we draw the line where freedom of speech is no longer relevant and hate and we've crossed into just that horrible, despicable, disgusting hate speech? And who should be the arbiter of that?
Yeah, no, look, I totally appreciate the question, but let's think about that. The First Amendment protects us from government censorship, not from consequences on private platforms. Meta has every right and frankly a duty to enforce community standards to keep its 3 billion plus users safe. Let's be clear. Speech that incites violence or targets people for being Jewish, for being gay, or disabled, it's not free speech. We're talking about abuse. And this is not just the ADL saying this. Even Meta's own oversight board, Paul, even their own oversight board warned that rolling back safeguards against hate is dangerous and irresponsible. So, of course, we support the First Amendment, but we are talking about a private company that is doing a terrible job protecting its 3 billion users. What does that mean long term for the company? What does it mean long term for shareholder value?
Ari, I want to ask you a question about Instagram because that's a meta property, and I noticed something about the algorithm based on my own doom scrolling. But something just popped into my head. Has the ADL ever sat down with Mark Zuckerberg? Has he ever honestly had a discussion with the ADL about how his platforms, his company is promoting? And it's not just anti-Semitism, but we're talking about all kinds of hate speech against different groups of people.
Well, there was the annual shareholder meeting. We had an opportunity to present Proposal 8, and that was presented for 3 minutes. So Mr. Zuckerberg heard this proposal. But I would say that ADL has been engaging with Meta for over a decade. For over a decade. We don't willy-nilly submit shareholder proposals. We submit shareholder proposals after we've exhausted all good faith discussions with a company. We have an ongoing dialogue with Meta. Meta is one of the most powerful companies on planet Earth, right? There was no Meta when you and I, where the three of us were growing up. It's hard to even describe how powerful and how influential Meta is on the entire planet. The ADL has been in dialogue with Meta for quite some time, really for over a decade. We speak to them on a regular basis. We submit incident reports to them when we see online hate. So there is ongoing dialogue with Meta. But when we hit a brick wall, and there's a brick wall behind me, when we hit a brick wall and we exhaust all good faith discussions with a company, that's when we take it to shareholders. Now, Adam, you know this, and Paul knows this. There's a dual class, this is corporate governance. There's a dual class share structure at Meta. So Mr. Zuckerberg essentially controls more than 60% of the vote. But I believe that when the vote is tallied, you will see independent shareholders. I'm talking about top 10 institutional shareholders. I think some of them will support this proposal. I think some of the largest pension funds will support this proposal because people are concerned about long-term shareholder value and what this company is doing to erode it. Sorry, Paul. Go ahead.
It's all good. Do you know who's fighting the proposal? Have they?
Well, the company's board has recommended a vote against it. But I will tell you that the two independent proxy advisors, right, Glass Lewis and ISS, have recommended to the people subscribed to their services to support it. So we hope that that this vote sends a message to the entire board, not only to Mr. Zuckerberg, that they need to do better fighting hate, right? We're not asking them to engage in philanthropy and to solve, all of the world's problems. We're asking them to be proactive on the platforms they own and make sure that that they do not boost hate on their platforms. 41% of Jews, 41% of Jewish users try to hide their online identity. 41%. This is unbelievable.
Let me ask you about this. And I was my own little social experiment with the algorithm. And I like many things that are pro-Israel and pro-IDF.
Sure.
And I've noticed that in my Instagram feed, I get a ton of stuff that would echo my echo chamber. But there's I'm not going to say his name, but there's the young man from, I think he's at Ohio State, who is being called out for his posts on TikTok and on Instagram, where he has been inciting people towards violence, especially after the murder of the two individuals who were gunned down because that individual thought they were Jewish going into a Jewish museum.
Yeah.
Regarding these algorithms, it's not just Instagram that uses those. TikTok uses those.
That's right.
And so how do you, I understand what Proposal 8 attempts to do, but how do you stop that proliferation when I'm not, my echo chamber is supporting what I think, and I would imagine his echo chamber, as vile and awful as it is supporting what those people think.
Look, ADL has something called the Center for Technology and Society. We engage with technology companies on a regular basis, and we engage in dialogue with them, and we urge them to do the right thing. We have gotten to a point with anti-Semitism now the way it is, that we must use every tool at our disposal to push back on hate. That's why we launched the first ever Jewish advocacy, Jewish values focused exchange traded fund on the New York Stock Exchange in late February. The ticker is TOV. People can check it out online. And what we do is we leverage the underlying assets in the 500 largest public companies in the United States to engage with companies. So when we engage with Meta, we don't only engage as a stakeholder, we engage as a shareholder. Meta is one of our largest holdings. We speak to investor relations, we speak to management, and we speak to board members, and we leverage our ability as shareholders to engage with them. Some companies that you mentioned, including TikTok, right? Those are private companies. X is now a private company. So there have to be other tools with them. But we will use every tool at our disposal to push back at online hate. And unfortunately, it's not just against Jews. It's against people of color. It's against women. It's against gay folks. It's against the disabled. And Meta has walked this back to the point where their own oversight board is calling them out on it. These are not just advocacy organizations. Their own oversight board charged with overseeing has raised the alarm, has sounded the alarm. It is time for Meta to do the right thing and make sure that it does everything possible to protect its users and to stop boosting hate on its platforms.
So a couple things. One is, I'm glad you pointed it out, because I think, by the way, the ADL's website under the history section is an amazing read. It took me 10 minutes, but it's really an amazing read. It's not just about people who are in their silos and think it's just about fighting anti-Semitism. This goes way beyond anti-Semitism. So, and my question is, what other companies besides? I know you're involved with Meta and you're involved with Google, Alphabet, and Adam would say, because I call it Google because we're over 40. The lady at the Red Cross this morning told me I look 38. What other companies are you guys trying to engage with in a public setting to counter the proliferation of hate social media?
Yeah, great question. Look, sometimes we're confrontational to the company, right? We're on different sides of the table for Meta. Meta doesn't want to do this, and we are rallying shareholders, institutional investors, pension funds to push back on Meta and urge them to do the right thing. Sometimes we're on the side of the board. There's something called the BDS movement, the movement of people who are anti-Israel, anti-Zionist, and they preach boycotts, divestitures, and sanctions against companies doing business in Israel. And they use the proxy process to file anti-Israel resolutions on corporate proxy statements. When we see those statements, we run campaigns against those resolutions. The company also advises to vote against those resolutions. But a lot of those resolutions, you mentioned Alphabet, okay? Alphabet has a multi-year, multi-billion-dollar Project Nimbus contract with the Israeli government. And we see the same rhetoric with weapon manufacturers. There are small number of people that are trying to deprive the state of Israel from access to weapons and technologies, entirely ignoring the security contacts, entirely ignoring the October 7th attacks by Hamas on Israeli civilians, and they are doing everything possible to use that system. Alphabet had to terminate more than 24 employees last year. It used to be, right, when we were growing up, if you wanted to protest the company, you stood with signs outside of the headquarters. So when the executives came in the morning or left at night, they saw it. Now they're being organized. Employees in the workplace are being organized by this movement. Imagine you're a Jewish employee showing up to a morning meeting, to an engineering meeting, and somebody next to you is wearing a T-shirt that says Google, "No more genocide for profit," in Google colors, right? How does that make you feel as a Jewish employee? So our research shows that over 75 of the S&P 500 companies are being targeted by the hateful BDS movement. We work with companies and we work with shareholders to push back on this. And that's another reason why it was really important for us to launch the TOVE ETF, so that we were able to, as shareholders, push back on these very hateful proposals, which accuse Israel of genocide, which accuse Israel of war crimes, of being an apartheid regime, all sorts of inflammatory language, and fundamentally trying to deprive Israel of access to weapons and technologies. When we see hateful rhetoric, we push back. This is not about supporting the government of Israel, a left government or a right government. We push back when the state of Israel is delegitimized and demonized by haters.
We've been talking about social media, and one of the things that I've enjoyed when I doom scroll is when these young men and women go out and interview the protesters who are cosplaying in their keffiyehs and the whole thing, and ask them, when you say from the river to the sea, and they can't tell you which river and they can't tell you which sea, they have no clue what they're talking about. But I don't think they're going to go away. BDS has been around since about 2005, 2006. Ari, I just want to remind everyone, because we have people who are watching on Twitter and on YouTube, you can ask Ari a question, you can ask Paul a question. Please share your questions. We will make sure that they get heard. Just put them into the chat and we will share them with Ari. Ari, I want to take a step back.
Please.
Because we've been talking about Proposal 8 at Meta. We'll find out within the next 4 days through their filing with the SEC what happens with the proposal. June 6th, I believe, is the Alphabet shareholders meeting, and there's the continual BDS attempts. We'll find out what happens on June 6th. At ADL, what do you hear from employees within companies, Jewish employees, who might be afraid to speak up within their work environment? Do they contact ADL? Do they reach out to you and say, look, this is happening, what do I do?
Yeah, absolutely. And we certainly can't, not in a position to disclose any company names, but when employees at different companies, many of the times public companies, many of the times technology companies, have issues, they often turn to ADL, and we have a whole network of regional offices that folks can reach out to, and we provide support to the full extent possible. And we have something called the Jewish ERG network, right? There's something, employee resource groups. Some companies call it affinity groups. That is a way in many companies, including Alphabet, which has, I believe, a group called the Juglers, that allows people who identify being Jewish to come together in kind of a safe space. Today, Jewish employees are facing hate in the workplace, right? So people are bringing their identity to work. They're seeing it on Slack. They're seeing it in the clothing that people show up with. So there's a lot of technology, and has really created new concerns in the workplace that just a decade ago really didn't exist.
Well, Nike, there was that ridiculous when Nike, I think it was the London marathon, when they put up that huge billboard, never again.
That's right.
Making, I can't even use the words because we're talking about the Holocaust there. I have Nike running shoes, but my next pair is going to be Adidas. To heck with Nike.
Adam, I'm the grandson of Holocaust survivors, and when I saw the words "never again" being used to promote the sale of sneakers in the London Marathon, I was shocked and outraged. We are engaging with Nike on this very issue, and I hope that they will do the right thing. I understand that they made a mistake. Everyone makes a mistake. People are human. Mistakes can be made. But what is really telling is when a company, a company with $50 billion plus in annual revenues, and a global brand like Nike makes a mistake, what's telling is what they do after they make a mistake and what actions companies like Nike take. And we're really hoping that Nike steps up to the plate and shows us what type of meaningful action a company that made a mistake could really take. That was really an outrageous ad campaign that they ran there.
Ari, when you engage with companies and you have evidence of, we'll say, hate environment, hate speech, hostile work environment, what do the companies push back on? When you go to company X and say, this is what we learned happened with your employees, and I'm sure they don't say, "Oh yeah, it's happening. We'll stop it." How do they push back, and what are they saying?
Look, we don't like to get involved on the individual basis with with an employee who has a problem with their boss. I mean, there can be a lot of different reasons why that happens. But if we see patterns in certain companies and certain sectors, that's when we engage with companies. We'll speak to their CHROs, we'll speak to their legal teams, we will offer educational resources to them. We offer something called Anti-Semitism 101, a digital module, which now goes on online learning management systems that many companies are using. So we are here as a resource for companies. Sometimes we're confrontational, but a lot of the times we want to be supportive. How can we help you educate your workforce? How can we help bring expertise and resources into your company so you can sensitize your workforce to these issues so they don't run campaigns to sell sneakers with the words never again?
Ari, does the ADL have partners outside of the Jewish world in these efforts with like Proposal 8, and not just the organizations which have endorsed this, but for instance, in the gay and lesbian world, the Human Rights Campaign? Are there allies who are joining forces with ADL on these efforts?
Yes, I mean, depending on the issue, we often work closely with allies, and we welcome allies on all of these issues. We deplore all forms of hate. Our focus, of course, is combating anti-Semitism, but we understand that all forms of hate must be combated, and that's why Proposal 8 at Meta not only focused on Jewish users, but also on gay users and disabled users, because those are the users that our experts found are experiencing the lion's share of hate online.
I think most people don't realize the ADL is fighting hate of all different kinds. So this morning when I was reading on the website about what you guys are doing online to combat hate, I have to remember, is it Backspace Hate? Is that the program?
We have a lot. We have a lot of different programs to combat hate. We have technology experts, PhD level technology experts, who really work with companies on their policies to make sure that companies are proactive in combating hate. One of the things Meta did, for example, is it eliminated the layer of checks and balances that it had with content moderation, kind of pushing it to the users using the X model. Now, in the short term, Paul, they may save a few bucks, but we think they're causing irreparable harm to their brand, and they really need to turn back the clock on this.
When I asked you about Zuckerberg, has there ever been, and I don't know if you can actually answer it, but I believe he's Jewish. Has anybody just ever sat down with him and said, "Hey, as you pointed out, you control 60% of the vote here, the shares. What are you doing?" Has there ever been that kind of one-on-one with this individual?
So ADL at the most senior level, Jonathan Greenblatt, our CEO, regularly engages with peers throughout different industries, and particularly in the technology industry. We never disclose specific conversations, but rest assured, people at the highest levels of Meta understand what the issues are, understand our perspective on these issues, but have really put up a brick wall and are trying to walk back any type of mechanism to combat online hate. We are very disappointed. The fight will go on no matter what the vote result is, and we think it's going to be positive. Shareholder resolutions are advisory to the board. Mr. Zuckerberg controls the board. We will be looking for other ways to engage with Meta and to rally institutional support and to rally users, to ask them, to call on them to do better. Meta has a moral responsibility. It has over 3 billion users on planet Earth. How many companies can say that it influences the lives of 3 billion people, right? This is truly extraordinary power it yields. And with that power comes responsibility. Adam, Meta turned 21 in February, right? It was launched in a college room at Harvard by Mr. Zuckerberg. Now they're an adult. It's time to grow up. It's time to do better. It's time to take responsibility. You're not a scrappy startup anymore without resources to do the right thing. We all know they have abundance of resources to do the right thing. It's the right thing to do, and it's good for their business and long-term shareholder value.